Right. So, Simba, you and I have been on this case for about a year and a half now. And many people haven't seen you and I sit together to tell them what we are doing. So we're doing this ZASM versus the U.S. government, the U.S. President, Secretary of State, OFEC, basically the American government, and we're also going against South African banks that are instituting sanctions on Zimbabwe, closing accounts, blocking accounts, canceling corresponding banking relationships, and also utilizing the excuse that they're blocking accounts because they are instituting anti-money laundering regulations and ensuring that people who money launder from Zimbabwe don't get the opportunity to do that. Now, you and I decided to take this issue to court as the Zimbabwe anti-sanctions movement, and we did it for a number of reasons. Number one, the concept that a foreign government can just decide to remove business people, investors, companies, and institutions of the government of Zimbabwe from the international banking system. I think you heard in the Gold Mafia documentary that a lady from the FBI actually had the guts to spell it out that we imposed sanctions on Zimbabwe to ensure that they're excluded from the financial system. And now we've seen them realizing that their sanctions are getting into problems, and all of a sudden they're starting to utilize money laundering. They're bringing up excuses like, no, we're not blocking accounts because of sanctions. We're actually doing it because we are money laundering. Even though the Financial Action Task Force rules are clear that the only time a person can be designated as a money launderer or a funder of terrorism is when it's done by the United Nations Security Council. But now, if the Americans just say Simba Chitando is actually, money laundering, they just block accounts. Even when you get to the airport at OR Tambo or come into South Africa with US dollars and you want to change them in a bureau de change, they can just refuse you because they say, oh, by the way, you're a person of you're a person of interest, or you're a politically exposed person. What's your take? Can you educate our people just to make them understand why you, as an advocate, have taken keen interest with ZASM to actually go against these sanctions?
The sanctions are, thank you, Tinder. The sanctions are a human rights violation. The idea that an executive, irrespective of whoever that executive is, executive government, wherever it is found, can unilaterally decide that they are going to target, and then they use the word target, individuals, and they say individuals, right? So a government versus an individual. And they punish that individual by going after the ability of that individual, or even a company in many cases, and in the case of a company, the employees of that company and the dependents of the employees of that company are then punished unilaterally in a manner that's inconsistent with the United Nations Charter. So we know it's illegal in terms of international law. It is also against the Bill of Rights in most countries that you can punish an individual without due process. So what, and it is a tacit admission that they know that due process would favor the individuals who are targeted. So what they do is that they go around the due process, knowing that there is a due process, knowing that they are violating the human rights of the individual. And they then apply this illegality internationally. And it is unacceptable. And I think it's important that every Zimbabwean knows that a patriotic member of our community, the Zimbabwean community, a patriotic I don't think patriotism is isolated to the country you're in, but an African, a Pan-African. If you can be patriotic about being an African, if you can be that way inclined, you will be unhappy that a Western country, after the history, a troubled history of colonialism, after political assassinations that took place, that they directed after all of the ugly history, which some of them are now only beginning to apologize for. They can then perpetuate this illegality.
Right.
So we said that this is unacceptable.
And what is interesting is the UN actually made a resolution in 1989 already, a resolution that they call 44-215, that prohibits the very same people you're talking about, the guys who brought us colonialism. They brought us slavery. They've been oppressing us for 600 years. And the UN realized that whenever they give independence to countries, they then utilize sanctions. They restrict their ability to trade to force those small, poor countries, impoverished by the West, and the West using its advantage from those crimes against humanity to then subjugate these nations, to force them to make policies that suit the colonizer. And the UN said that is tantamount to maintaining colonialism.
Yes.
In 1989 already they realized that.
Absolutely.
And so you were saying your case, you're going to court, is to give life to what the UN said, that Western countries must stop subjugating and using coercive economic measures or economic weapons to force African countries to make their rules. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, 100%. The fact that the first words in Zidera, in fact, they're framed, if my memory serves me correctly, it says coercive measures. They use that. The idea that an African country requires coercive measures as though we are an animal that needs to be somehow tamed, so that needs to be corrected in a coercive manner, and not in the international rules-based order of mutual respect. There's nothing mutually respective of each other, or there is no respect towards Zimbabwe, at least, when we require coercive measures. Right? That is unacceptable. If I were to say to an American or a member of a citizen in a Western country that your country requires coercive measures, and the coercive measures entail targeting their most successful companies so that those companies can no longer employ American citizens, and the American citizens, or whatever European country it is or Western country it is, in turn those employees have to take their children out of school. They have to now become refugees, and the country can't buy medicine, and all of the effects, the negative effects of sanctions, which the United Nations Special Rapporteur identified in her reports, not just one, I believe there are many. So they'll find that as an act of aggression. They would demand action from their government. You know, we've seen how the United States government, they're unhappy with TikTok, because they say that even if TikTok only targets only a few Americans, it's enough to get all of the Americans riled up. And they say, no, this is unacceptable.
So what people are asking is, they're saying, why have you guys decided to take this issue into South African courts? Why South Africa? Why not Zimbabwe? Why not go directly to the United States? Now, as a non-legal person, I've always said, South Africa is our biggest trading partner. And so if the Americans give power to their sanctions by forcing third-party institutions, third-party companies to block payments,